we spend more money replacing aging equipment than we do anywhere else, right? And are we asking the question that as we're replacing that equipment that's, reached its useful life or has been damaged or what have you, are we replacing it with more robust, more resilient equipment? And are those investments sort of responsive to some sort of understanding of the need for that equipment to actually operate successfully over the next 50 years in whatever environment it's going to face?
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our host Tim Montague bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 10 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS product lineup includes string inverters ranging from 25 kW to 350 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 350 kW, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. CPS is the world's most bankable inverter brand and is America's #1 choice for solar plants, now offering solutions for commercial, utility, ESS, and balance of system requirements. Go to chintpowersystems.com or call 855-584-7168 to find out more. Hey guys, are you a residential solar installer doing light commercial but wanting to scale into large C&I solar? I'm Tim Montague. I've developed over 150 megawatts of commercial solar, and I've solved the problem that you're having. You don't know what tools and technologies you need in order to successfully close 100 kW to megawatt scale projects. I've developed a commercial solar accelerator to help installers exactly like you. Just go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on strategy, and book a call today. It's totally free with no obligation. Thanks for being a listener. I really appreciate you listening to the pod. And I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Go to Clean Power Hour and click strategy today. Thanks so much. Last week, Storm Fern knocked out power for nearly 1 million Americans. And that wasn't a fluke. It's the new normal. Today's guests just released a report showing that every single one of the worst outages of the last decade was caused by extreme weather. Today, the authors of the report by the Union of Concerned Scientists, the report is Power After the Storm, are joining me. I'm so pleased to have Sam Gomberg and Rachel Licker here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So it is amazing how the statistics about outages have changed over the decades. The one that sticks in my mind is that billion-dollar events used to be like once in every 90 days, and now a billion-dollar event is happening every 19 days, I think. But paint us a picture, if you would, what you learned by doing this report.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Well, in this report, we were really interested in understanding the implications of extreme weather on power outages in the central part of the United States. So we used really fine resolution power outage data. And what we found was, as you said, every single one of the most consequential power outages was caused by extreme weather events. We know, obviously, that extreme weather causes power outages, but we know that there are other things that do so as well. So it was really remarkable to us to find out that every single one of the top 100 most consequential power outage days for the central part of the U.S. was caused by things like hurricanes, severe thunderstorms, and severe winter weather, like what's unfolding right now across the United States.
So I guess I'd love to hear what you both think we as energy professionals and prosumers should really be thinking about as the solution? In my mind, it's climate restoration, which is getting back to 300 parts per million so that we don't have all this crazy weird weather. But what is the takeaway for listeners? What is the action that we need to take as concerned citizens?
Well, I can jump in here. There's a host of actions. I think, unfortunately, we do have to recognize that the world we're living in right now is a climate changing world, right? We are impacting the climate. And as the data shows, the frequency and severity of extreme weather events are increasing. And, for me, as a sort of a system planner guy, I work in the MISO spaces. I do a lot of work on sort of planning out the electric system. For me, it was sort of like, well, okay, how do we integrate this knowledge into the planning that we're doing for the system right now? We are building transmission lines, we are building power plants, et cetera, that we expect to last for 50 years or more, right? But I don't see in the spaces that I work at, or very infrequently in the spaces that I work in, are we asking ourselves, what kind of climate are those assets going to have to endure to keep the lights on 50 years from now? There is a disconnect between the planning that goes on to figure out how we invest in the system and the climate science that is telling us what the conditions are going to look like 20, 30 years into the future. And so I think this report is really starting to hopefully get the light bulb to go off on what do we need to do to understand what that future climate is going to look like and make investments in the system that first and foremost help keep the lights on and save lives, but also that ensures that the investments we're making are going to be cost effective. Will they still last 50 years in a changing climate? Will they operate as we expect them to under some of these new extreme weather normals, unfortunately? And then hopefully it also raises the alarm bells that we need to continue to decarbonize as quickly as we possibly can. I think the science is quite clear that the more carbon we put into the atmosphere, the worse these types of events and these types of extreme weather trends are going to get.
Yeah, to level set, we energy professionals also have to recognize that, yeah, we're contributing to greening the grid and net zeroing the economy eventually. A recent report from Stanford University thinks we're on track to do that by 2148, not 2050 even. China's on track to do it by 2050. But let's just say we were, in the optimistic case, able to do it by 2050, right? We're still at 450. And that's a world that's worse than today's world. So we have to deal with a worsening climate, really, in the best of cases. And so I'm very curious, what is that infrastructure that we need to build? I think it's community scale microgrids, with large scale solar. This is a small solar facility behind me, a 2 megawatt AC facility that partially powers a community college. But there's no resiliency built into this, right? When the grid goes down, that solar array does absolutely nothing for that community college, unfortunately, because it is not a microgrid. We need microgrids that power tens of thousands of homes and communities, right? And we have the technology. We have the wind, the solar, the batteries, the switchgear. It's totally available. We're choosing to continue our tradition of building other stuff. And the utilities have, unfortunately, a lot of power in deciding what gets built. So what does society need to reprioritize when it comes to grid infrastructure?
Well, first, I might ask my colleague Rachel, what I think the first answer to that first part of answering that question is saying, like I said, what are we looking at in terms of extreme weather risks, as the climate warms and different carbon trajectories? And Rachel, I might ask you a little bit to to
Yeah.
shed light on that.
Yeah, that's funny. That's what I was thinking about as well. And just sort of imagining into the future across the central part of the United States where the study focused. And I think it's important to think about it from two perspectives. And I think that's both the demand perspective and also the impacts on the infrastructure perspective. If you think about it from the demand perspective, in the Chicago area, for example, historically, there have been about 3 days on average each year with a feels like temperature or heat index above 100 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-century. So it's 2026 now. It's not all too far away from now. That number is projected to grow as a result of human-caused climate change to 26 days per year on average. And by late century, if we don't take action on climate change and ramp down heat trapping emissions, that could grow to up to 50 days per year on average. But if we take these kinds of decarbonization methods and pathways and ramp down global warming emissions, we could limit that number to 17. And so what that means, obviously, is depending on the action we take, we could face very, very different demand scenarios. I mean, 100 degrees Fahrenheit days, that's extremely hot. Of course, people are going to need to be cranking up their air conditioning to stay safe. So that's kind of one perspective. But then if you think about the impacts perspective, what we found in our study is that the central part of the United States, many parts of it are facing pretty significant increases in severe thunderstorm activity. If you think about just one of those days can knock out power for hundreds of thousands of residents across the region. And some of the parts of the country could see on the upwards of 4 or 5 plus sorts of, 4 or 5 plus severe thunderstorm days per year as, the century marches forward. And so, those are pretty significant numbers when you consider the impacts. And that's just one bucket of extreme events. There's also a likelihood of more extreme rainfall coming from those hurricanes that make landfall. We also could potentially see more kinds of heavy snowstorms and severe winter weather in the places where it still occurs. And so when you kind of add that all up together and consider the possibility also that these kinds of events could co-occur sometimes or occur in short succession, it spells trouble for the region in terms of what the grid is going to be up against.
Yeah, and so getting to your question, Tim, it's that type of information that we're really hoping to integrate into the exact questions you just asked. What do we need to build? All kinds of power sources, whether clean or emitting, are impacted by weather, right? They lose efficiency when it's hot out. They struggle when they don't, when if you need cooling water and you don't have cooling water, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think about what's the type of infrastructure we need, I think you're absolutely right. Microgrids are certainly a big part of the solution, but so is a more integrated regional transmission system that can pull power from areas that are less impacted by whatever weather event we're having. So is hardening of distribution systems probably targeted because it can be costly, but hardening of distribution systems in certain areas to make sure we have power supply to critical infrastructure for long periods of time. And it is very much microgrids to make sure we're protecting people at the community level and providing some ability to get power online, what is probably, more, or either keep power online or get power online more quickly in those types of events that can cause severe damage to the larger bulk system. And, that is going to require communication and collaboration between communities, utilities, states, and regional transmission operators or organizations, like MISO, because we have to make sure, affordability is so front and center right now, right? And so we have to make sure that the investments that are made at the community level are complementary to the investments that are being made at the bulk transmission system level and sort of everything in between. It sounds very complex, but what our report is really trying to do is at least get that conversation started, get people wanting to be in the room to talk about this and asking some of these harder questions about what are the impacts we're facing in our region and what is the right infrastructure investments to basically mitigate that risk and hopefully do it cost effectively.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the human and economic consequences. Storm Fern was not extreme, unfortunately. It was typical. It is the new norm. And but it has real consequences for humans and our economy. It's a both and. So when the grid fails, and it's okay that we have made some mistakes by not evolving the grid fast enough. It is what it is. We have to look forward. We have to solve the problem. I'm not here to point fingers at anyone, really. I'm here to say we're smart. We have technology. We should change our ways and disrupt the system if necessary, if that's what it means. I mean, it's very concerning to me that you point out that only 3 states are prioritizing resiliency, in their planning: Michigan, Louisiana, and Texas. And I'm like, this is insanity, because it's a big country and we have this thing called the federal government and FERC. And why can't we do like a reevaluation and reinvention of our grid system and priorities and the way we make decisions about it? It seems like we're stuck in the 20th century. And it's so ironic because we created the grid to give us the good life that we have. It's amazing, right? It truly is amazing that we have 24/7 electricity most of the time in most places, and HVAC on demand, right? We have an amazing life compared to 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, much less. But what are the consequences of these events like Fern?
Yeah. I can take a first stab, and then Sam, if you want to follow up. Well, we know that these extreme events are really consequential from a range of perspectives. And one really important kind of takeaway message is they don't fall evenly across communities. There are certainly communities that tend to bear the brunt of the impacts. They're not necessarily prioritized in terms of power restoration efforts, and those tend to be communities that are historically marginalized. And so that's one really important point to consider. And maybe Sam can talk a little bit more about sort of the metrics and sort of understanding that and why that is the way that is. But then from other perspectives, like I said before, often these events are co-occurring or occurring in short succession of one another. And so if you look at one example that we talk about in our report, is the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. It was really remarkable. It was a very, very active season. Just in the state of Louisiana, there were 3 of the top most consequential power outage events over the last decade were 3 hurricanes, Delta, Laura, and Zeta, that occurred within a few months of each other, and they hit the same communities. And these communities were still reeling from the previous ones, and so it's just this 1-2 punch sort of situation. And if you have more extreme weather events occurring because of human-caused climate change, you're more likely to have that kind of situation moving forward. So that's a really important thing to consider. Then in terms of consequences, something that we also found in our report was that the mortality from these kinds of extreme events are actually often much higher than reported by official sources. We saw that, there were direct deaths associated with them in terms of floods and storms, for example, but then there were a lot of indirect deaths caused by, for example, carbon monoxide poisoning, often in the severe winter storms where people might be using the, generators or, warming sources inside that causes air poisoning. And then, as I mentioned, these kinds of events don't fall evenly across communities. And so, there are a lot of situations, for example, in which there were damages to low-income communities or mobile home communities, individuals with disabilities, elderly, where it's not just a matter of losses of income or losses of resources because they didn't have the power on and lost food in the refrigerator, but sometimes it's a matter of life or death. when the oxygen equipment can't operate, for example. So, it's a pretty wide ranging set of effects from these kinds of events.
Yeah, this expression, disadvantaged communities. Let's put a face to this. What comes to mind for me is low income and people of color, but more. I mean, the really big factor here is low income. I think there's plenty of poor white people in America too. When you think about a power outage, an extended power outage, let's say for more than 48 hours. I, as a middle class American, have the option to decamp and go to some other place, and whether that's by car or plane or train or whatever, right? And go to some place where there is power and rent a hotel room or stay with a relative. But many low income people don't have that privilege. It's expensive to travel and then stay in a hotel, right? This is hundreds or thousands of dollars, depending on how long the outage lasts. So tell us a little more about how you guys see the face of the impacted people.
Well, I think you make a very good point. Another thing that really brings it home for me is thinking about hourly wage workers. So I'm thinking about folks in communities right now that are still snowed in or still recovering from Winter Storm Fern, who may have gone days without being able to go and go to work
and earn a living. Yeah.
Right. And so, that can be really devastating for people who are living on the margins, paycheck to paycheck. And now it's very likely they're going to get hit with a very high electric bill because during these winter storms, natural gas prices spike. A lot of the states that are impacted, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, are very heavily reliant on natural gas for electricity. And, when those gas prices spike, the electricity prices spike, and those costs are passed straight through to ratepayers. So even when they do get the power on, there can be a financial burden to turning on the lights and getting the house warm again. So, I think one of the main things that really comes out is for a long time, I think the electric industry was really focused on, are the lights on or are they off? They have this standard of 1 day in 10. We try to build a system where we have a power outage once every 10 years, but there's until just recently have we not gotten serious about thinking about how much it matters how long the lights are out. And only really since Winter Storm Uri, which was a seminal moment for I think a lot of us in the industry, have we started to look at things like, not just did the power go out, but how long did it go out? How quickly can we restore power to these communities? Because duration really matters, particularly when you're talking about events that cause life-threatening conditions like winter storms.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 10 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS product lineup includes string inverters ranging from 25 kW to 350 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 350 kW, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. CPS is the world's most bankable inverter brand and is America's #1 choice for solar plants, now offering solutions for commercial, utility, ESS, and balance of system requirements. Go to chintpowersystems.com or call 855-584-7168 to find out more. It seems to me there's like a cascading impact of these outages, right? There's the direct impact and the potential life-threatening hazards that let's just say it's an ice storm brings, right? You lose power, so you don't have heating and electricity, or heating and lighting, potentially. I mean, it's great to have a gas furnace, right? But there's a blower there that moves the air around, right?
Exactly.
And so when the power's out, you don't have your gas furnace working really either, right? Now, and then there's this, I mean, I don't know how you think about this, and maybe that's something that would be good to just get on the table, because power lines can go down, power plants can go down. There's other, substations can go down. What are the things that we need to harden, I guess, in order to really be more resilient and resistant to these storms? Because as far as I can tell, the storms are going to keep coming for the foreseeable future. Like, we have to up our game and build more hardened, better infrastructure as a first line of defense, no?
Yes, I think that's right. Those are the types of questions that we're really trying to elevate with this report. We don't have all the answers, and I think it's very clear that the costs and effort to build a system that is 100% resilient to every risk is probably outside the bounds of the appetite for what we're willing to pay, right?
Sure.
And so we have to ask a lot of hard questions to understand where is that spot where we can we can harden certain infrastructure that's going to give us a good bang for our buck in terms of either being able to keep the lights on or get the lights on quickly after an event. Where do we need to invest to make sure that the most vulnerable are protected? And where do we need to invest to do this in a way that also accelerates decarbonization, right? And so it really is a really complex formula that right now we're just not seeing these questions being asked in all the right venues. We're not seeing the collaboration between all the various parties, the communities, the utilities, the states, the MISOs of the world, et cetera. Because you got to be able to say, we can't harden the system against everything. So what are the risks we really need to address? And where are the investments we can make to start mitigating that risk and bring that risk level down? Even if we recognize we can't get it to zero, and even if we recognize that there is uncertainty about what the future will hold, these impacts will be dependent on how much more carbon we continue to emit into the atmosphere, how society evolves over time. What do we do with data centers who are putting an enormous amount of pressure to also build, and how do we integrate that in? So we don't come to this conversation saying that we have all these answers. I think we're come to this conversation saying we need to do better about understanding the risk. We need to develop metrics that help us evaluate different investments in terms of mitigating that risk and what is an acceptable cost. We need to improve our communication so that everybody's bought into this effort, so that when we say, hey, we need to spend this chunk of money to harden this transmission line or to build this microgrid, that people are bought into the benefits that they're going to get from that and understand why this is a good investment. And we're really like I said, we're not coming with all the answers, but we're saying these are questions that we all need to start digging into, because climate change is moving ahead, unfortunately, whether we're standing still or not. So we shouldn't be standing still.
I mean, I really think that the Clean Coalition's work, this is Craig Lewis. I don't know if you are familiar at all with his work, but he's all about helping communities develop community scale microgrids. He's developed a paradigm called VOR, value of resilience. And it's just a simple hierarchy. If this is a facility or a campus that contributes to life saving, like a hospital or a fire station, right, that's the top priority. And you say that's worth 3 times the average value of having power. And then the next level is like community centers that are providing resources for a larger group of people. This would be schools and places where people can gather for extra warming or cooling and food distribution, or sleeping on cots if there's a bigger problem like a hurricane or a tornado, and then everything else, so to speak. But is somebody like really working on integrating this into the bigger picture? Because I just see the ISOs kind of dancing around the edges, but not really substantively upping the game. And so I guess I'm curious how you see what is the opportunity that we're faced with, because if firm storm scale events are now expected, what should be built differently? Like, we have to ask that question.
Mhm.
I think you're absolutely right. We do have to ask that question. I think your characterization of the ISOs dancing around the edges is accurate. Um, there are barriers that we need to break down in terms of lines of communication. I think you see ISOs saying, well, the customer is not really, the ratepayer is not our jurisdiction. That's the utilities jurisdiction. The utilities are our customers. I think that creates an artificial barrier to an ISO really thinking about the communities that it's there to serve. So that's just one example of sort of communication lines that need to be broken down. I think, solutions like we've talked about happen at every level, and issues happen at every level too, of course, but solutions happen at every level. They need to be complementary, so this question of what do we need to be building, you know, from my perspective, we need to be building a more regionally and interregionally integrated grid so that we can be pulling power from further away. And so that when power plants are struggling, we have a bigger pool of resources to pull from. At the same time as we need to be building community specific resilience, because each community is different, has its different vulnerabilities, has its different populations that it needs to protect. So we really need to be building at both ends and of course, in the middle.
One thing I'm just wanted to add is I think it's also really important, and it's sort of maybe like the water we're swimming in, or some other sort of metaphor that we could talk about, is the information that we have at our fingertips right now with respect to climate science and extreme weather. We have in the United States some of the most sophisticated resources available through our National Weather Service and our government agencies, in terms of modeling and prediction. But unfortunately, we are in the situation where we're seeing, divestments in those kinds of offices and infrastructure, with a lot of resources being taken offline and staff being, losing their jobs. And that has real consequences in our ability to see what's coming down the pike, both in terms of the short term and the long term. And so I think, a really other important piece of this puzzle is the information that can inform those kinds of risk assessments. And so I think it is important to keep that in mind, and for the power sector actors to be cognizant of that shifting landscape potentially, and also to kind of have a little skin in that game too, because it is really in their best interest in terms of having the most sophisticated risk assessments possible.
And in terms of who is working on this, I do want to uplift the Electric Power Research Institute at
Mhm. Yeah.
They've been really, for the last 3 years, really trying to develop ways for utilities and other infrastructure stakeholders to understand the different types of risks coming from climate change, understand how different types of infrastructure are going to respond. So how the materials are going to respond to being exposed to, months instead of days of 100-degree temperatures, how they respond to higher winds, and being able to say, okay, now we have a better assessment of how our infrastructure responds to a changing climate, and that can inform how we invest in new infrastructure. So I want to uplift that as one tool that is out there and is really sort of out on the cutting edge. You speak of valuing resilience, and I think that's another area of work where we're seeing some really great minds and organizations dig into how do we value the increased resilience of better investments so that we can plug this into sort of our cost benefit analysis and being able to articulate to our communities why this investment, delivers benefits even as we have to, spend money. So there is good work coming out, but it is slow and we're way behind. I mean, a lot of this work really didn't get off the ground until after Winter Storm Uri. I think for the first year or so after Winter Storm Uri, I was engaged in more conversations about how we define the word resilience than conversations about what do we actually do to protect the system, right? And so it gives you some sense of how slow this can move, and we need to move faster. I think that comes. I think the ISOs like MISO have a huge role here because they have an enormous convening power, right? they can get the states, all their states in the same room. They can get all their utilities in the same room. They have enormous technical capabilities to do the modeling and look at the system much more broadly. So I think they have a very critical role here to play in these discussions.
I mean, what is just common sense about Clean Coalition's work is they say, okay, today the utilities want to build transmission and distribution. Tomorrow they can build solar, wind, batteries, and switchgear and provide resilience. They want to build infrastructure because they have a cost plus model. We want to give them that, but build infrastructure and mandate that they build infrastructure that incorporates resilience into the grid. We have the technology. The same old grid is clearly not going to work. It's too brittle. And it's no fault of those engineers that designed that system, right? Of sticks and wires. Like, it's amazing when you drive across America just how monotonous that system is and how unresilient it is. And yes, the natural disasters there's a lot of hot spots, so to speak, right? The Gulf Coast, California, but truly nowhere is free of the potential for very serious outages. And I just think that we have to get into and not in decades, but in months, we have to get into a new mode of we need community scale resilience, and microgrids are the way. Can you give me an argument like why we shouldn't do that, and why aren't we doing that?
Uh, Specific to microgrids?
Yeah, community scale microgrids. Like we just so clearly need resiliency at scale. I don't know of a better way to do that than with DG powered microgrids. I mean, today the federal government seems to think that the future is SMNRs, small modular nuclear reactors. And that's all well and good. I have nothing against that technology fundamentally, but it takes a decade to build a nuclear power plant at least. So how is that going to be the answer, right? It's not. It's not going to change what's going on with these storms and these outages.
Well, I think you make a good point with community scale microgrids. I don't want to put sort of community scale microgrids, and you know this, into sort of one homogeneous bucket, right? Those local solutions are also going to vary from community to community. And I think those are conversations that need to happen at the community level. What are our needs? What are the resources we can tap into? And how do we potentially do this in a way that's cost effective, right? I still think there is certainly a role for the larger distribution and bulk systems to make sure that the investments they're making are complementary. I think that a point you make about the current infrastructure is very important, because I think what a lot of people may not realize, we're talking a lot about connecting new loads. We're talking a lot about building, large bulk transmission lines to move power around and so forth. But certainly over the last decade, and I would even say probably on a year-to-year basis, we spend more money replacing aging equipment than we do anywhere else, right? And are we asking the question that as we're replacing that equipment that's, reached its useful life or has been damaged or what have you, are we replacing it with more robust, more resilient equipment? And are those investments sort of responsive to some sort of understanding of the need for that equipment to actually operate successfully over the next 50 years in whatever environment it's going to face? So I think that's a big part of it.
Well, let's close with a lightning round. No pun intended. Okay, and just give me a short answer, and you can pick and choose as you see fit. So, what is a most misunderstood myth about grid resilience?
I would say the most misunderstood myth is that it's a responsibility of any one party. I think there is a huge responsibility by utilities. There's a huge responsibility for states to step in here and provide proper oversight and regulation. There's a huge responsibility for communities, I think, to elevate their voice and make sure that their vulnerable populations and their vulnerable infrastructure is accounted for in whatever investments we're making going forward. And so that would be my response.
And what is one investment we keep delaying that will cost us the most?
I would say honestly, targeted community scale microgrids, because that is how you are going to protect those people that are most vulnerable. And when you say what will cost us the most, I think of lives lost. And if there's any one metric that we apply to how we respond here, maybe that should be nobody dies. And so I think those solutions probably happen most effectively at the community level.
And finally, what should decision makers do before the next storm Fern?
Start talking to people. Decision makers need to hear from their communities. What are your priorities? Where are you vulnerable? So that we know where we need to invest quickly, because these types of events are going to come again, and they're probably going to come pretty soon.
You've been very quiet, Rachel. What do you have a final takeaway for us about your report and what needs to change to stop the bleeding?
Yeah, thanks. I was thinking a lot and listening to Sam and his responses to your questions, really, really interesting. And, just reflecting on the last point about the need for decision makers to talk to the people that they're representing. And, their lives are implicated in these kinds of decisions. And, expanding upon that, just we need as much information being embedded into these kinds of decisions as possible. And so, from the scientific perspective, there's an abundance of evidence at our fingertips, and making sure that that's being used in decision making so that, we're not making uninformed decisions about what's going to happen in the future. But we actually have so much right here. We have so many people who can help get that information into the right venues, the right places, so that we can make the best decisions possible for people, so that there are no lives lost when these extreme events do increasingly happen.
Storm Fern isn't a warning, it's confirmation. Grid resilience is no longer optional, it's no longer theoretical. If you're developing or financing energy assets, this report is required reading. I'm Tim Montague. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Tell a friend about the show. That's the best thing you can do to help others find this content. And I hope to see you at a trade show in 2026. My goal is to meet 100 listeners. So check out our events page, and I'll see you there. Hey guys, are you a residential solar installer doing light commercial but wanting to scale into large C&I solar? I'm Tim Montague. I've developed over 150 megawatts of commercial solar, and I've solved the problem that you're having. You don't know what tools and technologies you need in order to successfully close 100 kW to megawatt scale projects. I've developed a commercial solar accelerator to help installers exactly like you. Just go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on strategy, and book a call today. It's totally free with no obligation. Thanks for being a listener. I really appreciate you listening to the pod. And I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Go to Clean Power Hour and click strategy today. Thanks so much. Thank you so much to Sam and Rachel for coming on the show today. I really appreciate the UCS, the Union of Concerned Scientists. And how can our listeners find you?
Well, you can always go to ucs.org. You can find all of our content, including the Power After the Storm reports. That's where you can find us.
Thanks for having us.
I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 10 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS product lineup includes string inverters ranging from 25 kW to 350 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 350 kW, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. CPS is the world's most bankable inverter brand and is America's #1 choice for solar plants, now offering solutions for commercial, utility, ESS, and balance of system requirements. Go to chintpowersystems.com or call 855 584 7168 to find out more.